Welcome to radicalwellnesstv.com. This is Laura Lee, and I'm on Chapter 8 of the Sometimes God Has a Kid's Face. Sister Mary Rose McGeady, a city sister, which is a religious person that believes in God and everything, and created a home for children to come to be able to be helped when they're out on the streets of the city. And I'm reading through the chapters, and this is chapter 8 about the experience of when the children show up at these places, called the Covenant House. Chapter 8, his favorite trick was to beat me with a broom handle. Nice, huh? The 180-pound, gray-clad statue sat dead still in the middle of our shelter, perched atop a large green sofa. For hours and hours, for many days, the statue just sat there, taking a place amid the bedlam of our shelter, but never taking part in any of it. Like all statues, the eyes never moved, the hair never went out of place, the body never seemed to move as much as an inch. But in this case, the statue's eyes were brown, his hair was gold, his soft, pasty skin hung from his body like an old suit of clothes. Our statue was a flesh and blood kid named Howie. He was one of the most unusual homeless kids I've ever met. He came to us one day like most of our kids do, quietly, tentatively, and unannounced. A lost and lonely kid wandering through life, hoping to find a place to rest his head. But the moment he stepped inside, we could see that Howie had a little more of a problem talking than most kids. The sounds that came out of his mouth, and there weren't many, were more like grunts than words. Oftentimes during his first hours here, his mouth would open and remain that way for close to a minute before the sounds began to find their way outside. Any kind of physical contact, such as a pat on the back or a warm handshake, made him uncomfortable, as if he wasn't ready yet to share any of himself with anyone. It wasn't because he was a bad kid, just a scared one, a very, very scared child. "We're so glad you found us," we said. No response. "We want to help you," we said. No response. "We hope you'll stay and let us be there for you," we said. To this, he replied with a grunt. After we talked to Howie and cleaned him up and fed him and gave him a warm bed to sleep in, we decided to let him find himself in his own way. For the first few days, he would go down to the center of the shelter and miss all the bedlam, and then sit transfixed on the couch. On one hand, he desperately wanted to be around people. On the other hand, he desperately didn't know exactly how to interact with us, to reach out, to trust. He was like a statue in our presence. As the days wore on, however, we hovered over him. The words and feelings began to come out. At first, he played tricks, like taking the phones in our shelter off the hook so it would beep and someone would come over and put it back together. That was his way of calling out for attention. Then finally he began to speak. The more he spoke, the more we realized he was so afraid to trust other people. "I've been on the streets for 3 months," he said, one day when I came by to say hi and ask how he was feeling. "I don't have any place to go," he said a few minutes later. "The only place I could go is way too dangerous," he said. "Do you want to tell me more?" I said. "That sounds like it must have been difficult," I said. The statue nodded his head and began to go on. For the first time I could see the beginnings of a tear in one of his eyes. "I lived in a house with my mother and her boyfriend," he said. "He used to do some pretty bad stuff to me," he said. "His favorite trick was to beat me with a broom handle," he said. At that moment, he lifted up his shirt slightly and turned his back toward me so I could see the scars. "It hurt a lot," he said. I touched his back and patted him on the shoulder for a second, to let him know I cared. "I'm sure that it did," I said softly. "It got to be where he was beating me every day," he said, "and telling me what a jerk I am. I told my mom about it, but she didn't want to believe me," he said. "I didn't really have a choice," he said. "I had to get out. I had to run away. So I did," he said. "It wasn't much better out there," he said. "It was really bad," he said. Once he began to talk and find others who would listen and care, the words began to literally pour out. "I want to make something of my life," he said. "I want to be somebody," he said. "Watch me," he said. One day last week, I picked up the answering machine to hear a familiar voice on the other end. It was Howie, 1 hour after he had gone for a job interview. "Hello," a tentative voice said. I don't know what to say," he said. I did it," he said. "I don't know what else to say," he said. And then the phone clicked off. I could swear I heard a kid crying softly in the background just before the phone clicked off. I want to thank you for helping, Howie. I mean, our kids come to us in all shapes and sizes from all places and all kinds of problems. Some of them are so alone and desperate to reach out and connect with someone that they can't stop talking the moment they reach our shelter. Most of them, however, are more like Howie, so afraid and insecure and beaten down by the reality and the world around them that it takes a long time to trust enough to share their words with someone else. And it's very, very beautiful when one of these kids makes it so very beautiful. We're going on to chapter 9, but before I read that, I'm going to read a prayer written by a kid in our Covenant house. Dear Father, I just want to ask you for your help in the time I'm away from my mother, and please help me in my actions and my attitudes towards people, because I know it has got really bad. And Lord, please help me in the rest of my teen years, because the last 5 years of my life have been the worst. I am here, Lord, to rededicate my life and to comfort my family. I thank you for my life and for the staff members, counselors, and pastor at the Covenant house. I need a Bible. A prayer written by a kid in our Covenant chapel. Anyway, chapter 9, subtitle is, He Seemed to Have This Thing About My Brother, she said. Anyway, love life and life will love you back. Hate life and life will hate you back. But if you don't know any difference, we need to teach the love to our children. Let's take 100% responsibility and help get these kids where they need to go so they can flourish. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video, which is chapter 9.